Syntax of the active participle, attributive. In the introductory module to this chapter, I said that the participles in Hebrew function in ways very similar to adjectives in Hebrew. So we have the attributive, the predicate, and the substantive. Now in this module we'll take a look at the attributive. In the next two modules we'll take a look at the predicate and the substantive. Now it would be good to have the functions of the adjective fresh in your mind, so I would suggest that you go back to chapter 9 and refresh yourself. Even if you think you know it, it will probably be useful to review that and then come here and take a look at this. You'll get more out of this module if you have that one fresh in your mind. So let's take a look at the attributive. Attributive participles, they do three things. They modify a noun, just like the adjective does. They normally follow the noun that they modify, again, just like the adjective, and they agree with that noun in gender, number, and definite status. Again, just like the adjective. So all these three features here are just like the adjective. And remember, it agrees in three ways, right? 1, 2, 3. Important not to forget the definite status. So let's look at an example. Here we have Ha'ish ha'omed. Now, amad means to stand. That's our verb over here. Ha'omed, here's our participle, here's our noun. So the man, and now what are we going to do with this here? Well, let's take a look at whether it does what we expect. Does it modify a noun? Is it following? And is it agreeing in gender, number, and definite status? Well, it is, this is the the MS form, right? Omed. I was going to say 3MS, but participles have no person, so you can't say a 3MS participle. Just a masculine singular participle. And this is masculine singular, right? One man. And we see that this is definite, and this is definite. So they both agree in gender, masculine, number, singular, and definite status. And it is following, which is the normal position for an attributive participle or an attributive adjective. And so we can say that this is modifying this. So we would say the standing man. Ha'ish ha'omed, the standing man. Now let me show you how this is very similar to what we have with the adjectives. Really the same. Ha'ish ha'omed is similar to Ha'ish ha'tov. Tov means good. Tov is an adjective. If this is the masculine singular form, this is the masculine singular form of the man, and they're both definite. So it's exactly parallel. The standing man, the good man. Here we have an adjective, here we have a participle. Okay, got some other examples here. What did I want to say? Oh yes. The participle, you can say the standing man, so this is modifying this, just like an adjective. You can also translate this, the man who is standing. So you can use who, or that, if you're dealing with an inanimate subject. So what you're doing is you're translating it as a relative clause. And sometimes you will want to do that. So you want to say the man who is standing, as opposed to the standing man. But it's context that's going to tell you that. You can't tell just by looking at the forms of the verb here, or looking at this limited syntax. You want to look at the whole sentence. The other thing is that participles, so let me, let's put it down here, we'll say relative clause. So sometimes you want to translate these attributive participles as a relative clause. The other thing, that's the first thing I want to say here, the second thing is that there is no time expressed as in the participle itself. So if you want to know whether this is the man who is standing, or the man who was standing, or the man who will be standing, we have to look at the greater context of the sentence. Some other verbs or some other circumstantial information has to tell us what the time reference is for this whole sentence, and this participle will follow that. It could even be the man who might be standing. So there is no time embedded in the participle itself. It'll follow whatever the context is. That's very important to know. No time. Okay, let's look at some other examples. Here we have Melech Yoshev. So Melech here is king. Yashav is to sit, in this context anyway. Notice we have the full holem vav here. Remember I said that you can have the full holem vav or just the holem in participles. This is masculine singular, right? Yoshev, we see the tzere there and no ending. It's not Yoshevet, it's not Yoshevim, it's not, or Yoshevim, and it's not Yoshevot. So we just have the masculine singular form here and here, and they're both indefinite. So this could be translated as the king, or a sitting king, a because it's indefinite, or a king who sits. I should say here that these next examples here, they all come from Sale's grammar. He often has good examples, and these are found on page 83. And his examples come from the Bible. So this one is from Proverbs 20, verse 8. A king who sits. In context, it's probably a king who sits. But in isolation, just these two by itself, it could be a sitting king. Now there's another example that Sale gives. Hamelech hayoshev. This one's Melech Yoshev, Hamelech hayoshev. A king who sits, the king who sits. And this example comes from Jeremiah 29:16. Now, again, without a context, you could say the sitting king for this. Here we have Lev Shomea. So Lev means heart, and Shama is to hear or listen. And so here we have a listening heart. This comes from 1 Kings 3:9. You probably would not translate this, a heart that listens. Probably from context it would be a listening heart. Just like an adjective modifying the noun. Notice we have our furtive patach there, Shomea. And one last example, Eish Ochala. And this comes from Deuteronomy 4:24. A consuming fire. Literally, a fire that eats. Achal is to eat. And so an eating fire, a consuming fire. And again, you probably would not translate this a fire that consumes, but rather a consuming fire. So attributive adjectives and attributive participles are very similar. The attributive participles, they will normally they modify a noun. They normally follow the noun, following the noun that they modify, and they agree in these three ways: gender, number, and definite status. They can be translated as a modifying element, a consuming fire. They could also be translated as a relative clause, a king who sits.